Welcome back to this oddly unbalanced world of ours. On one hand, the celebration of opening up and returning to church and dinners on the patio. And then the ever increasing case numbers and people seemingly unwilling, or is it incapable, of doing anything to protect themselves or others, bringing the threat of renewed closures. So, we'll see which way it goes. I'm planning a trip to Edmonton in 3 weeks for a splendid investiture of the Templars there, and their advancement from commandery status to that of a full priory. So keep me and the hard-working Templars who are putting on the first post-coronavirus investiture in your prayers. Last Sunday was the first church service in 6 months at St. Monica's, and what a joyful event it was. At the conclusion, when Kim sang "How Great Thou Art" as a solo, the whole church broke into applause. Not at all an Anglican thing to do. Just like so much new and different, and some of it so good. Take, for example, the joy of togetherness that we never truly appreciated before this March. We just took it for granted that people were always around and available. If only we could find the time to fit them in. But with deprivation comes appreciation. When we have so much that we rely upon unthinkingly, we needed a focused pause to help us notice and recognize what we have, or had. It's also been a time of looking back at all the changes that have taken place in our lifetime, big and small, barely noticed as they happened. But so much has been added to our lives over the past century, and our lives have speeded up so much. I remember my parents getting a car and then going for rides in the country after church on Sundays. It was a great time to be together. My father would recite old Canadian poems like "The Wreck of the Julie Plante" and "The Cremation of Sam McGee." I don't know whether it was because there was no radio in the car or because none of us could sing, and I can still recite some of their lines almost 70 years later. I remember our first TV, just days before Ed Sullivan hosted Elvis Presley on his show, and 2 friends snuck over to my apartment to see what their parents denied them. It was so daring, even though we could only see Elvis from the waist up, and we preteens did not understand why everyone was so excited about that. I mean, really. How much could hound dog corrupt youth? Well, over the past 6 months, I hope you too have had the opportunity of remembering delights of the past, the innocence, the laughter, and of course, the angst of growing up worrying over the date for Friday night and the pimple growing wild on the end of your nose. But what do the teens of today worry over as COVID looms over all? I also have had time to look ahead and add things to my bucket list. That wonderfully self-indulgent listing of things that just are for you. Promises to do and to get to before one leaves this mortal coil. I used to think of the phrase, "the dimming of the light," as your eyes closing on the world in death, in line with Dylan Thomas's challenge to his father, "Fight, fight, fight against the dying of the light." But no, it's just a physical reality. Now, either the label makers of the world are in a conspiracy against me and are reducing the font size on their contents and instructions, or Toronto Hydro is reducing the amount of light shining through their bulbs. Because surely the light is dimmer when I try to read those instructions or thread a needle. I remember feeling I was being humored when my mother or grandmother would ask me to thread their sewing needle when I was a child. Ha! Now it's my reality that it takes 5 or 10 tries before I get the wretched thread through that tiny eye of the needle. A new prescription for my glasses should fix that problem, and my search for the light goes on. But I'm in no rush for the day when I will, like everyone else, walk into the light of this world and the next, the light that is Jesus, which is heaven's great glow. There's an odd bit in the Gospel of Mark when he introduces the notion that when the crowds grew too great because of the healings and the miracles that accompanied Jesus' teachings, it became necessary to dim the light, because the mobs were into quick fixes and visible signs, and the teachings, the word, was not being heard, and thus hearts and the world could not change. That, Mark explains, is why so many of Jesus' teachings after that point are in the form of parables. That is, lessons that you actually have to think about and think deeply about to understand the message. This, Mark explained, effectively created an elite who truly were educated in Jesus' teachings and understood what he was saying. Through them, the word could actually be comprehended, taught, and integrated into others' lives. I'm not sure I agree that creating parables that result in so many different interpretations has done much to bring people closer to Jesus. Well, maybe closer to him, but certainly not to each other as they quibble over what lesson is to be learned from a particular story. But perhaps that is the point, that in reading and studying, we understand the parable as we need it in our lives, and we should worry less about imposing our own interpretations on others and just learn what we need to learn. However, I don't think that needs to be our biggest worry about in 21st century Canada. People are not clamoring to hear the word, debating meanings late into the night, charging through the doors to get to church, or crowds large enough that clergy are forced to deliver their homilies from offshore boats. No, our challenge is an individual one, to reach out and find a hand to grasp, a heart to touch, a mind to excite. Being heard by those who have not already heard is the greatest of challenges. Personally, I find so much of the Bible open to far too many interpretations, and I look at our world's history and see far too many divisions, caused by the way different people told the stories and heard the words and took up arms in defense of their interpretation. I think we all need to step back and just look at what we must do or not do. For those of the Abrahamic traditions, there are the 10 Commandments that teach us what to do and what not to do. First and foremost, to love our God and do right by others. And those who share the New Testament have the 2 commandments of Christ that tell us to love our God and love our neighbor as ourselves. A friend and I were talking about what God expects of us, and how do we know when we've done it, or what more it is that is expected of us. Well, we both rejected the notion that everything, every move in our lives, is predetermined. And we agreed that life only makes sense if free will exists. But moving from that point, we found different perspectives, just the way we end up with those tricky parables. One argued that there were individual challenges and deeds expected of one, and that in choosing freely, you could choose to accomplish them, ignore them, or fail in your attempts. The other posited that it was the choices you made in the myriad of contacts and choices of each day were what counted. Good manners versus rude gestures, kindness versus ignoring, helping versus hurting, and all the tiny and not so tiny things that one opts to do and not do as we wander through this world. At the end of the day, when we crawl into bed and say goodnight to our God, do we look back on things in which we can take pride or shame? Generally, I find it's a combination. Sure, we could have done better, but on balance, it was a pretty good day. Or a day that we wish we could redo and improve upon. But as long as we're examining our choices and our actions, we're moving in the right direction. We're moving our world closer to the world that we want for others and for ourselves. We're moving closer to the world that God envisages for all to desire. We may not be able to change others, but we can change ourselves. Little by little, act by act, we can be world changers. We can be God's agent, one little deed after another. They say that you create a habit by doing something 20 times in a row, 20 days in a row. So this is easy. Just make enough right decisions and they will automatically start popping up as the first choice. In a dark room, you turn on the light switch. In a dark world, be the light. So may it be. Amen. And don't forget, while this was fun, it's Sunday morning after all, and the church doors are open. If you can, there's a congregation somewhere that would delight in seeing you. If not, online there are endless options. See you next week, and God bless.